When Los Angeles pledged to spend more on homelessness, how many of you thought that that budget would go to police? We'll discuss the surveillance industrial complex this week on the Laura Flanders Show with Hamid Khan, and then come back to New York to meet the students that persuaded Columbia University to divest from private prisons. All that and a few words from me on the Freedom of Information Act. Welcome to our program. Surveillance, spying, and infiltration have a long history in the United States, from the police red squads in the 1880s to the FBI's counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, right up to today. Our next guest says the surveillance industrial complex has profound but poorly understood impacts on our political, structural, economic, and cultural lives. Hamid Khan is the coordinator of the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and he works with, among others, the National Network for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, Political Research Associates, and the Youth Justice Coalition. I'm ever so glad I'm in LA and get a chance to talk with you, Hamid. Great to have you.
Thank you very much, and welcome to LA.
Thank you. Well, you'll tell me how welcome I should feel in just a moment. Why don't we start with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition? What are you up to? What do you do?
So the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition came together in the summer of 2011. A very diverse group of people who were extremely concerned about this rapidly expanding, I would say, the national security surveillance state. Knowing that this is nothing new, it's not a moment in time, but a continuation of history, we started looking at and focusing on the Los Angeles Police Department particularly to see that what kind of programs and tactics were they using.
And what did you find? And
what we found was a massive apparatus and an architecture of surveillance and spying and infiltration where both human assets and electronic technology was being used very effectively to gather information, to store information, and to share information. Anywhere from the suspicious activity reporting program, which basically started out of on the heels of the 9/11 Commission report, which was I would say, the foundation for this new type of intelligence-led policing that has become the main operational tactic for law enforcement agencies, that it is anchored in two concepts of behavioral surveillance and data mining. In essence, legitimizing speculative policing. So if you're out there taking photographs in public, very much constitutionally protected activities. If you're even walking into a building and asking about hours of operation, if you're using a video camera, if you're taking notes, you are deemed suspicious. And what's interesting is that the way the Director of National Intelligence defines suspicious activities, and it's a direct quote, that it's observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning of terrorist and or criminal activity. So when you break it down, observed behavior, I'm watching somebody's behavior, which reasonably indicates to me there is no probable cause that somebody's thinking of doing something wrong.
According to your interpretation.
According to the Director of National Intelligence.
So while we were all focusing on Google gobbling up our data, maybe we should have been paying more attention to the police?
We should absolutely be paying more attention to the police, and I think that's where one of the I would say myth, but I think that's where the lack of information lies as well. I mean, you just started off by saying about the police red squads. The local law enforcement agencies predate the federal agencies by many, many decades, going back in the late 1800s, right after the Haymarket Strike and May Day, and then the development of the police red squads. I mean, immediately in the aftermath of the Haymarket Strike. And
well, for people that don't know what Haymarket is, what was it and why was that such a trigger point?
It was an incredible, it was a pivotal moment in the U.S. social justice movements, and particularly labor movement as well, because that was a demand of the 8-hour workday in Chicago. And people fought, just hard for that. People gave up their lives. But it was also a pivotal moment for local law enforcement and the national security state as well, that how do we then look at this moment and then ramp up our structure, the national security state structure, the apparatus, because people were gathering, people were mobilizing, and people were engaged in militant revolutionary tactics.
So militant struggle organizing around the 8-hour day. At that particular occasion, bombs took out the lives of some police. It's never been clear who actually was responsible for what, but it was blamed on anarchists, and we see the start of the kind of policing you're talking about.
And now linking it to that, to today, 2013, Department of Homeland Security comes out with a memo declaring basically anti-gentrification activists as anarchist extremists. There's a whole memo, a 4-page memo that they put out, and based on 3 low-level arsons, which were in Seattle, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and in Vancouver, where they claimed that anarchist extremists were involved in that. And the memo goes on to say that if there's any rally or distribution of flyers and information on rights for homes and anti-gentrification, these should be considered a threat to national security, and a suspicious activity report should be filed on people.
We're sort of approaching the, I think it's 14-year anniversary of the Patriot Act. That did provoke a lot of attention to these questions of intelligence, surveillance, our freedoms. And yet, poll after poll, at least the ones that get publicity, show that Americans support these measures. Is there something wrong with the polls? Do people just not know what we're talking about? And what does the Patriot Act have to do with the LAPD?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, culturally speaking, I mean, the race and the creation of the other is deeply anchored in how society has evolved in the United States. This is the politics of the historical politics of this country. This is a cultural issue. This is a social issue. It's an economic issue.
Yeah. So if you don't actually have a racial difference, you make up one. They were all called Reds, after all.
Absolutely, and quite frankly, preserving the white supremacist system of control and white supremacist system of social control as well. So the Patriot Act was another piece, but I think one of the things that remains missing in the conversation is that how post 9/11, particularly counterterrorism and counterinsurgency policies and programs have been increasingly incorporated and codified into domestic policing, which gives them immense amount of power, which gives them a lot of immunity, and which allows them to bypass local policing in local policing, other things, the restrictions that would be placed on them, for example, warrant requirements. So things, and then when you add all the battle-tested equipment, and the tactics, for example, the suspicious activity reporting program started off as a counterterrorism program. Predictive policing, which has gained a lot of momentum now, comes from a counterinsurgency tactic in Afghanistan. That's where the U.S. military gave a grant to a professor at UCLA to see if they can predict, using algorithms and mathematical equation, if they can predict acts of insurgency. Professor Jeff Brantingham decided to bring it home, and in 2009 just did a presentation to the LAPD and the U.S. military, showing that how, and drawing parallels between Afghani men with their arms and weapons, and then drawing parallels with youth, Latino youth in East LA, and using these labels of terrorists and potential gang members and urban predators. So I think this is something that we need to be looking at very closely, that what it does. And then when you add the electronic technology around Stingray, which mimics the cell phone towers, and then the digital receiver technology, which jams our cell phones as well, the automatic license plate readers, the high definition cameras, and now drones are coming in, now cops are going to have body cameras. So you see this intersection of this rapidly expanding surveillance state.
Will the body cameras that we keep hearing are a response to community complaints improve anything?
They are, I mean, under the guise of community complaints, body cameras are being instituted, right. But when you look at the use of the body cameras, number one, just technically speaking, the body cameras are not on the officer. They're always looking outwards. So they're always kind of gathering information on people.
And who has access to the footage?
And the police has access to the footage. And when you look at data mining, that how this footage, and going back to LAPD, like you were saying, which basically has this incredible structure of fusing all this information together. I mean, you've heard of fusion centers, which are warehouses of information gathering. There's about 85 of them around the country, and one of the biggest one is in Los Angeles. But LAPD itself is such a model of creating these programs and these tactics. So anything that is picked up from the body camera goes into their internal fusion centers, and it's data mined and it's captured, and it's...
So if you were maybe jumping a turnstile or, I don't know, picking someone's pocket in the background of the footage, could you get arrested?
Absolutely. The chief of the police is on record, Chief Beck of LAPD is on record, that all the information that is gathered all through a body camera is up for evidence.
Talk a little bit about how you got into this, because you were an organizer in the South Asian community, one of the founders of the first South Asian Center here in Los Angeles. 9/11 happens. Many of the people that you're working with are involved, are targeted. Right now, we're in a Black Lives Matter moment where this discussion is mostly taking place, at least at the media level, around African Americans' relationship to the police. What does your coalition look like? Who's in it? And what strategies are you following to try to make a dent in all this?
So the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition is an extremely diverse group of people. It includes people who were formerly incarcerated. It includes undocumented immigrants. It's based out of Skid Row, so it includes a lot of poor people and people who are unhoused. It includes transgender and LGBTQ community members. It includes academics, lawyers, youth, teachers, artists.
And why do they all come?
And they all come because people are extremely concerned about where this is going, and they all feel targeted. They all feel as if they are moving targets, because people that I've just called out, most of them are always the other. Most of them are the undesirable. Most of them are the unwanted. I mean, and then it includes some faith-based and community-based organizations as well. The basic principles that the coalition came together was that this is not a moment in time, but a continuation of history. Number two, that there's always an other, that how the other is created. We've seen the faces that have been paraded throughout history, that how those faces are now then deemed criminal, the criminal black face, the savage native face, the illegal Latino face, the manipulative Asian face, the terrorist South Asian face. I mean, I'm reminded of the Japanese internment concentration camps, and the reason was General DeWitt, who was arguing for it, says that persons of Japanese ancestry contain enemy race blood, hence inherently disloyal and shall always stay unassimilable. So the otherness is very deeply, so this was the other coming together and building that power and exposing this and engaging in broad-based community education and outreach with the goal to dismantle this system.
So what kind of things do you do?
So we do a lot of community outreach and education. We do town halls, we do teach-ins, we do surveys, we put out reports, we do a lot of research. We've done a lot of Public Records Act requests looking at the legal angles as well. But one of the other principles was that traditionally what we have seen is that while there's a lot of movement building in the United States around immigrant rights, around housing rights, around gender justice, around sexual rights, but around the national security state and the police state, there's not been a grassroots movement, and we've always sort of deferred to law firms or civil liberties, privacy type organizations like the ACLU.
Until Black Lives Matter.
And now people are building this thing. People are coming together and saying, wait a minute, we need to take control of this thing. We cannot just defer to the court system, because the courts have completely absolved themselves of any of the responsibility.
And what about the big frame in which we have discussed these matters of surveillance, at least in the media? The white-dominated media has focused typically on questions of privacy. I haven't heard you say that word once.
Because when I spoke of all the others, I mean, privacy, we've never had privacy. Our bodies have always been paraded, our bodies have always been scrutinized, our bodies have always been for sale or for abuse or violation of our rights. So I think it's also necessary for us to understand that information gathering, information storing, and information sharing becomes a key tool for social control.
Right.
So now increasingly what we are seeing is also that how this information gathering, for example, Palantir, which is a software that is used by the CIA and the LAPD and various agencies, is also hooked up to Medicare. It's also hooked up to social services. So now what we are also looking at is this interconnectedness between surveillance and public benefits.
The National Nurses Association, NNU, National Nurses United, has been sounding an alarm around electronic medical records.
Absolutely.
Sound very benign, but they're another form.
I mean, when you are
gathering.
on public benefits, when you're out in the street being a poor person, I mean, like, and being unhoused, you are constantly being surveilled. You go to a caseworker and your information is gathered. So I think it is also something that how individuals are being impacted for their Section 8 vouchers, how the EBT cards, food stamps, other issues.
Your organization is also committed to imagining effective alternatives. We're interested in that here, too. When it comes to community safety, community cohesion, good relations, what have you come up with?
So several things. I mean, obviously we are now, I'm on the board of Youth Justice Coalition, and one of the key mandates of the Youth Justice Coalition is that they have a 1% campaign. And they have identified, looking at all the budgets in Los Angeles County, whether it's probation or DA or sheriffs or 46 other LA police departments in LA, that over $100 million can be allocated out of these that can go to investing in the lives of young people in the city of Los Angeles, in the county of Los Angeles. And these are young people who actually did real search, what they call, did the surveys, did all the search on the numbers, and came up with this thing, and they have brought this proposal to the county that how it would create 25,000 jobs, how it would create 500 peacekeepers, how it would create, alternatives to young people. So similarly, looking at, for example, the Los Angeles Police Department's own budget, it gets 52 to 55% of the general funds of the city of Los Angeles. So we are demanding that those monies should be reallocated. This fall, the mayor and the city council members just announced a state of emergency when it comes to housing or homelessness in the city of Los Angeles. But what they didn't say was that, and they said they're going to allocate $100 million. They don't know where that money is going to come from. But what they didn't say was that the existing $100 million that goes to homeless services, out of that, 87% goes to LAPD for policing the homeless. And only 13 million goes to other kinds of, and these are the numbers that came from the city controller, Ron Galperin himself, just earlier in the spring this year. So I think these are the type of things that we need to be really lifting and exposing and putting a spotlight and organizing around and demanding that, this is unacceptable.
Hamid Khan, thank you so much for coming in. If you want to find out more about the coalition, we'll have information at our website. I hope we get to talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Private prisons and the way that they're using the incarceration of Black and brown bodies as a way to exploit people, make money, and control political power is just a new iteration of a system that has been going on since this land was first colonized. Our effort started in the fall of 2013, and so from there we started doing research. We were looking into the university's investing practices, found out that, there's not a lot of transparency around this issue. Me and another student walked up to the building where this advisory committee on socially responsible investing is. I made up a story about I was writing my urban studies thesis on development and wanted to know about the university's investment practices, which was a total lie. And after that, they sent us a list.
When we first found out what Columbia's investments were, it was $8 million directly invested in CCA, which is Corrections Corporation of America. It's the largest private prison company in the US. And it was $2 million in G4S, which is an international security firm. And they do not only private prisons, but they also run all sorts of security regimes like the Israeli apartheid state.
We see the buildup of our system of police and prisons as we know it as coming out of the period just after slavery, where you have slave patrols, right? And you have a convict leasing system where Black people in this country were essentially being re-enslaved through a process of incarceration.
We actually put up an abolish banner over on this Thomas Jefferson statue across campus because this school is built on stolen land by slaves, and Columbia has all of these statues memorializing that exact point in history.
There's all kinds of amazing prison abolitionist work going on, and divestment is just one part of that.
We young, we strong, we marching all day long.
It's one tactic that's a part of a much broader movement that includes the people who are shutting down bridges and highways after the Daniel Pantaleo, the officer that killed Eric Garner here in New York City, non-indictment.
You can't stop the revolution! You can't stop the revolution!
We are connected to broader coalitions of folks who are organizing to get, churches to divest, to get the city of Portland to divest, things like that.
I want y'all to be unified, and regardless of race, creed, or whatever, but this is a Black issue.
There's always been labor to be exploited and money to be made out of policing Black bodies in this country, and it's really fundamental to how we work.
I'm tired of this going on. I gotta leave what? Why can't the citizens?
Connecting that right to how institutions like Columbia have been built up, being created as places for white men to come and learn and get fancy degrees and go on to make lots of money. The campaign launched with a letter drop in President Bollinger's office.
This is why we come to you disappointed, with the inconsistencies we see between Colombia's rhetoric and its practice. This is a call for action.
From the start, we really wanted a response from President Bollinger. We planned an action to take place outside of his classroom. He teaches a class on freedom of speech, which we found pretty ironic.
Colombia invests in a system in which a black person is killed by police or security every 28 hours.
We do need to do this. Divestment is urgent. A black person is killed every 28 hours by police or security. Colombia is invested in that system. We have to be accountable to that. We've been trying to meet with you for 8 months.
Institutions like Columbia are so much held together by fancy rhetoric that is a lot of times really empty.
The important thing to say is that there's a process. It's been set up for a long time. There are students on it, there are faculty.
Last semester was the 30th anniversary of the blockade in Hamilton Hall during the South Africa divest days that actually won divestment from South Africa in '85.
There's been a lot of discussion about various things over the years. As Laura Flanders just said, apartheid in South Africa is a classic example.
And so we kind of got together with those alum activists and just talking about strategy. Every tactic that they use, there's now some rule or some committee or something that the university has put in place to make it more complicated to organize.
Columbia is not the easiest space to try and not have the police called on you.
You really have the opportunity to make your case in this process. It comes through that process to me and then to the trustees.
And so you really just see the ways bureaucracy and bureaucratic repression and how it's kind of really built up in that historical way.
I am thrilled that you have raised a number of questions that make people like me feel uncomfortable.
This moment for us isn't about patting Columbia on the back or patting us on the back for that matter, or about saying that Columbia has divested from systems of incarceration and policing. Columbia is actively working with the NYPD to criminalize and displace people in West Harlem in order to expand this campus.
We were trying to tie connections to the other ways in which the university perpetuates anti-blackness. For example, with the gentrification and expansion into West Harlem. There were raids that went on in the Grant and Manhattanville housing development last summer that Columbia backed because they said it was helping to keep our neighborhood safe. And in the process, hundreds of young men of color were locked up.
We are not any more deserving of being here than anyone who is in prison is deserving of being there.
It's really global in its scope, and that G4S is multinational. They're involved with militarization of the US-Mexico border, with checkpoints and detention centers and prisons in Israel and the occupied territories in Palestine. They run centers in the United Kingdom and South Africa. Unanimously across the board are a terrible company and are constantly dealing with complaints of human rights violations, sexual violence, torture, all kinds of awful things.
أول ما ردوا بعدين قالوا له ودع الأولاد لأنك يمكن ما راح تشوفهم.
2, 3, 4, open up the prison door.
It was always very important to be tying prison divestment to racial justice, to immigration justice, to gender justice, and really talking about how all these things are tied together.
Columbia, dump your prison stock.
No more than this close. This close.
Our demand was to have any direct investments divested, so they removed their investment in CCA and in G4S. They promised a negative screen for the entire private prison industry. So meaning that moving forward, Colombia won't be investing in private prisons again.
But that's not the end of the movement. That's not a kind of be-all, end-all win. Colombia is invested in systems of inequality that uphold the kind of image of the deserving of opportunity Columbia student. And so Columbia is in both ideological, material, and still probably other financial ways invested in these systems. And we're interested in continuing to work to dismantle those. I mean, I'm a senior, so hopefully other students after me.
That was a report by our own producer, Jonathan Klett. You can get more information at our website. Just because it's called the Freedom of Information Act doesn't mean the information is free. In fact, if you're an activist or a journalist trying to investigate police, chances are it's going to cost you, as reporters discovered last year when they tried to obtain documents pertaining to the police killing in Ferguson of Michael Brown. In their efforts to report that story, reporters were being charged exorbitant fees for records that are supposed to be released to the media for free. Missouri has an open records law, yet according to the Associated Press, news agencies were being charged thousands of dollars, nearly 10 times the cost of a government employee's salary, just to retrieve government records. Price gouging like that is one heck of an effective way to stall and stymie public oversight. As our guest, Hamid Khan of the Los Angeles Coalition to Stop Spying points out, this city price gouging is going on just as surveillance is expanding. The Intercept reported this July that the Department of Homeland Security has been monitoring Black Lives Matter activists, their Facebook, Twitter, and social media accounts, and their meetings too, since the first days after the killing of Brown. You only need to watch Stanley Nelson's new documentary about the government's deadly assault on the Black Panthers to see how history could repeat. The best antidote to heat is light, in an attempt to expose the movement surveillance that's going on, and I suspect to make a point about freedom of information that's not so free, the online activist group Color of Change is launching a fundraising push. Unlike the well-funded Intercept, which used FOIA requests to obtain documentation about spying, activists don't tend to have the money to find out if they're being spied on. But you can help. You can get more information about the Color of Change campaign at our website. To tell me what you think, write to me, Laura, L-A-U-R-A, at lauraflanders.com. And thanks. What would our world look like today if our media showed us as much collaboration as they do competition? What if we got to meet people making change right here, right now, in all sorts of ways we're usually told are impossible? Subscribe today to the Laura Flanders Show for in-depth interviews with forward-thinking people. Smarts, not sound bites, every week, right here. Subscribe, and thanks. Today on the Laura Flanders Show, we talk with a young man who served 10 years in prison on a gun-related charge.
The Million Man March sort of comes from the premise that we need to empower our men first, and then everybody else will follow. And I don't know if that's logical, right?
And hear from culture critic Jeff Chang.
The refusal of folks in the U.S. to see what it is that we are doing around race recreates these structures of segregation.
Today on the Laura Flanders Show, Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama.
So there was slavery all across the world. But in most countries, slavery was a transitional status. It could happen to anyone. It was not permanent. They were societies with slaves. America became something different. We became a slave society.
Later in the show, we find out how your community can be part of his history marking project.
Join us in this conversation so that we can move forward together.